Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Spoke's very first webinar. I'm Martin McDonnell from Spoke's, the Lothian Cycle Campaign, and I'm producing the webinar this evening, together with Stephen Dominey from Cycling UK in Scotland, for kindly lending us their webinar facilities and support. This webinar is being recorded and will be available via our website on the Videos tab in a few days' time. If all goes to plan, you won't be seeing me again until the end of the evening. You will, however, possibly be getting some messages from me through the chat function, which you'll see in your control panel. It's either chat or questions. I can't remember which of those two. It's great to be doing our first webinar. We've had to postpone our public meetings this year and last due to coronavirus restrictions. We only decided about a month ago to try a webinar, and thanks to Cycling UK and the willingness of our speakers, it's all come together very easily and quickly. We aim to do further webinars and hustings in April, something probably in the summer, and then probably one in November for the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26. This being a webinar, you, the audience, can watch and listen, but we can't see you, and we can't hear you either. You'll notice a control panel on your screens in which there's a questions box in which you can put in questions and send them to us. Ideally, whenever you think of them, don't save them up till the end. That then gives us time as organisers to sort the questions out, and we'll be passing them on then to Dr. Caroline Brown, who'll be chairing the Q&A session. She'll be putting your questions to our panel of speakers. I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Dave Defoe to introduce the event. We then have about 25 minutes from our guest speakers, who you can see on the agenda there, from the City of Edinburgh Council, followed by 5 minutes from each of the three speakers who have been very active with Spaces for People and similar measures in their local areas. Then on to 45 minutes of Q&A, followed by closing remarks. We aim to finish the webinar at around 9:15, but we're fairly flexible on that, so if there's still lots of questions and things, we can carry on for a wee while. Okay, I'll hand over now to Dave Defoe.
Thanks very much, Martin. Well, it's great to be back for the first Spokes public meeting for over a year because of the coronavirus, of course. And the virus has turned life upside down across the world. Many lives have been lost. In Spokes, we send our best wishes to two members we know of who are suffering many months of the long COVID. Spokes is proud to have played a small part in the response to COVID. Thanks to the kind donations from our members, we were able to grant £1,000 each to the bike station and to Bikes for Refugees towards their schemes to get bikes to key workers so that they could free up space on the buses. A very large number of bikes were distributed, I think well over 100. There was great feedback from key workers who appreciated not just the bikes, but also the Spaces for People segregated cycle routes which they could use to get out to the Royal Infirmary and the Western General. Tonight's meeting, of course, is on the future of Spaces for People, and I'll just call that SFP in the future. SFP is a Scotland-wide programme with similar schemes right across the UK. The legal basis for the schemes was laid out by the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government also allocated £39 million, which is quite a lot of cash, of which Edinburgh successfully bid for just over £5 million. The purpose of the SFP schemes was social distancing, including freeing up space on buses and, of course, also to provide for safe outdoor exercise. Edinburgh, with its cash, has built approximately 40 kilometres of semi-segregated cycle routes on main roads. They've widened many footways in town centres, and they have introduced safety distancing measures at some 70 schools, including some road closures, which effectively creates mini low-traffic neighbourhoods in the areas around these schools. And all this in less than 1 year, an incredible achievement for which the Council can be rightly proud. However, although the schemes were introduced for COVID reasons, it was widely recognised by government and councils from the outset that the schemes also contribute to wider goals of climate, public health, congestion, etc. For example, the Scottish Government's Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure has stated many times that he would like to see successful schemes made permanent and that he would help councils to do this. In the Scottish Parliament, MSPs from all parties supported this. For example, the Conservative Transport Speaker, Graham Simpson MSP, pointed out that scrapping successful schemes would mean throwing away millions of pounds of public investment. However, making SFP permanent cannot just be done with a stroke of the pen. It requires, for one thing, lots of time for public consultation, detailed design and traffic orders. And Spokes is the first to agree that the temporary materials and designs used for SFP have their problems, albeit much outweighed by the benefits. And of course, the council is making adjustments to the temporary schemes on the basis of experience. As well as needing lots of time, to make schemes permanent needs lots of cash. And we welcome the Scottish Parliament budget deal between the Greens and the government, which has added more cash for this specific purpose, although a great deal more will be needed over the next few years. Finally, a quick aside on the question of consultation. Spokes very strongly supports full consultation on making schemes permanent and learning from the experience of temporary schemes. However, it is ironic that with zero consultation, far greater changes have been made to life on our streets, making it more scary and dangerous to walk or to cycle or to cross the road. The gradual growth in numbers of cars both moving and stopped at the curbside. The more recent growth in car sizes and SUVs due to the 11-year freeze on petrol duty. All this adding to danger, pollution, and the congestion which bedevils our buses and ambulances. Next slide, Stephen. Congestion slide. No, I think we're missing the final slide. Okay, anyway, the point of the final slide was to show the congestion which has resulted from this increase in number and size of vehicles and the delays to emergency vehicles and buses which result. And that's not to mention the residential area rat runs which have been created in recent years by widespread sat-nav use. And all this happened with zero consultation. Anyway, to return to Spaces for People, I'm delighted to introduce our main speakers from the council. Councillor Lesley Macinnes, who is convener of the Transport Committee, and Phil Noble, who is a senior officer on the Spaces for People project. And they have 25 minutes between them to leave plenty of time for the question and answer session later. Thank you. So I'll pass over now to Councillor Macinnes.
Thank you very much indeed, Dave. That was a very helpful background to some of what I was going to say. And in fact, you've stolen my thunder on a couple of things with what you were able to bring to that introductory speech. Thank you. The presentation I want to give to you today, and if we can have that up on the screen, if possible, please, Stephen. The process I want to go through this evening is to give you a little bit more background around the Spaces for People temporary measures, how we're intending to move forward and the degree of engagement that we've had, and then what our next steps are going to be. Thank you, Stephen. So we're moving to the third slide, please. Thank you very much. So this is covered in part by what Dave has just said. I mean, we were very fortunate to be awarded that initial £5 million worth of funding, which has been augmented in the interim period through another route of funding directly from the Scottish Government. And I think that was a clear recognition in that very first few opening weeks of possibility around Spaces for People in that national scheme. It was a recognition of how far we had prepared, really, in terms of our active travel programming, our understanding of what was needed inside the city, and our ability to implement fast. So we had that recognition. The first tranche of funding was only for 10 million, and we got 5 of it. And obviously that was then augmented by the Scottish Government as more local authorities requested funding. But I think it is an indication of how fast we moved and started to really get into some of the nitty-gritty around some of the more complex and more difficult to deliver schemes. But what we have delivered so far, and Dave mentioned some of that, is that, for example, our auto-pedestrian phase at traffic signals, we're looking at additional space for physical distancing in city centre and 10 town centres. You'll have seen some measures there which have attracted some degree of controversy, but actually do deliver greater amounts of space for people who are accessing businesses, shops in those areas to physically distance when walking, and indeed often when cycling as well. We've delivered 40 kilometres of segregated cycleways now on main roads. That is quite a remarkable figure for a city of this size in this space of time. In the same period, London has delivered around about 100. Now, when you consider the difference in population size, the difference in terms of funding ability and so on, the fact that we've delivered over 40, albeit still a very small proportion of the road network that we have here in the city, I think is something to be proud of. I think we've done it as well as we possibly can. There was a mention there from Dave about the quality of the temporary infrastructure. Clearly, it has to be a temporary infrastructure at this point. But I would hope that if we go ahead and retain some of these cycleways, that the move towards a longer term infrastructure will reflect some of what we're seeing in other European cities at the moment, notably Paris, with some of the really solid segregation, granite blocks, all of that kind of stuff, which will enhance the presence of those segregated cycleways and expanded walkways in the city. We've also delivered 3 kilometres or more than 3 kilometres of space for exercise measures, with road closures and cycle segregation, which has been very valuable at different spots during this last year. 29 road closures or access restrictions near schools. Dave's absolutely correct. What that does is a much greater degree of security for parents and children alike in terms of how they're accessing those schools, their ability to stay apart and therefore reduce the risk of infection, and the chance for them to access schools in a different way. All of those, I mean, some of them are as big as road closures, access restrictions, pavement widening, got here, but they also include things like cutting back vegetation, for example, some of the smaller interventions which help along that way. We've also reduced quite a lot of clutter around schools, so some guardrails have gone, allowing people to use the space in a different way. Could we look for the next slide, please, Stephen? Thank you. Clearly, we have placed quite an emphasis, particularly in these latter stages of the project, on street clutter removal. It's of vital importance. We're working with Living Streets Edinburgh on a lot of those schemes, trying to remove, wherever possible, some of the street clutter that's built up over decades in order to meet the same objectives of the Spaces for People project. There are 1 or 2 cycle segregation projects, for example, Lanark Road, which are still in the final stages of implementation, so they're not fully up and running. And we're also looking at 1 or 2 projects which are still being cooked, so to speak, in order to bring them to fruition. One of those is Broughton Street, where we're looking to provide extra space for pedestrians and cycles. And that's currently being discussed at the moment, but is quite close to delivery. Could we go to the next slide, please, Stephen? Thank you. It's important to look at how Spaces for People works against all the other direction of travel strategies that we've had in the city under this administration. We've pushed really hard to produce a greater understanding of where we need to be to get us towards that 2030 net zero carbon plan. And so some of the really big pieces that we've been looking at have, of course, been the recently agreed and published City Mobility Plan, which is linked in turn to the development plan for the city, called City Plan 2030, where we're looking at where the city is likely to develop, either in terms of residential homes or commercial development, and making sure that we're working in concert with that when we look at our transport service, a transport network, sorry, and our options for sustainable transport inside the city. So that city mobility plan is a real game changer as far as our discussions inside the council are concerned and how we can take that forward. And of course, there are other very complementary strategies attached to that. City centre transformation is one. The biggest piece of work that we've announced on this recently has been the George Street changes and the designs, and we're ready to get that underway in the course of the next few years. And of course, always we have the active travel action plan, which is being revised at the moment. And clearly that's done in conjunction with all the thinking that sits behind, for example, the city mobility plan. So we're very much encouraging people to try to switch towards more sustainable ways of getting around the city. I think most of us in this room, in this meeting, will recognise the fact that we've seen a vast increase in the number of cars registered in Scotland. We've seen a vast increase in the number of miles driven in Edinburgh across the last few years. My understanding is that we're now driving 154 million miles more per year inside Edinburgh, which is after all a relatively small city, than we were 8 or 9 years ago. All of that is putting incredible pressure on different aspects of life in the city, notably the quality of life for people, congestion, which has an economic and health cost, which is enormous, and really our lack of ability to move towards that 2030 net zero carbon goal. So clearly we have to encourage people to switch away from that to much more sustainable ways to travel. We need to make it more pleasant, easier and safer for people to explore their local area. That ties in very much with the 20-minute neighbourhood, which is a concept which is being picked up by cities all over Europe, where we try to contain all the facilities that people need within a 20-minute neighbourhood. In fact, we're going even stronger than that, and it's noted within the City Mobility Plan that essentially what we want to try and do is provide appropriate facilities within a 10-minute walk from somebody's front door and a 10-minute walk back. It's very ambitious, and there's a lot of planning that needs to go into that across a number of different aspects of council service delivery and partnership working across the city. So we're also trying through Spaces for People, as we look forward, to continue to support high street and city centre businesses by providing much more space for people to move around and not have the space allocated so much to cars with all the attendant issues that are attached to that. We're looking to improve the road safety. We all know the requirement for that, and I think most of us in this room will recognise the very serious nature of the number of cyclist fatalities that we've had in the city. And so road safety is of prime concern to me. We're also looking at improving the health of the city in the most general terms, but also with specific positive benefits for the NHS. And then clearly, something I've already been referencing, reducing emissions to help the city achieve net zero carbon by 2030. Could we have the next slide, please, Stephen? As we move towards this understanding of how and what and whether we should take forward some of these temporary Spaces for People schemes and absorb them into the more permanent infrastructure in the city, we clearly have a responsibility to take forward a number of degrees of engagement. So there's been mention already of the consultation, which is ongoing. That will target stakeholders, businesses and residents to allow us to understand better the views emerging out of those three groups. Stakeholders include, for example, emergency services, Lothian Bus, and there are various other access groups, for example, that have a concern there. Businesses speaks for itself, and residents, of course, is the same thing too. I took the recent decision to extend the consultation by 2 weeks, and it's finishing now on the 5th of April, in order to widen that consultation as much as possible, to encourage people to come in with their views as quickly as possible. It also reflected a couple of minor operational hiccups we had at the beginning, so we wanted to ensure that everybody had their chosen method of interacting with the consultation, whether it was through paper forms, whether it was through online, which of course is how most people are interacting with it. It's been really important for us to undertake that and to be seen to undertake that. We have the market research piece, which is running parallel to this, and again will inform us as to how we go forward with this. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. The engagement exercise, as you'll see from here, is people are being encouraged to participate and to give us their views through a number of different methods, some of which are slightly different under normal circumstances, but they still are working for us. Clearly, media briefings, we've been doing a lot of work with the media where we can, although we have with mixed results in terms of useful coverage. On-street advertising, slightly different again from what we would normally be able to do. Radio advertising, a lot of it's very targeted to try and encourage people to come forward. Social media, of course. Online press and local newspapers, we've been buying advertising in those press outlets. And we're also direct emailing to over 100 of the stakeholder and community organisations. So it's been a big exercise for us, but one that is, in my opinion, very well worth undertaking, because we have to understand what the city is looking for, particularly in the context of that wider strategic work that we've been doing and what we've garnered from those consultations undertaken under more normal circumstances. Could we go to the next slide, please, Stephen? So where do we go next? Clearly, this is a piece of work which has caused an enormous degree of comment so far, but at its heart is the democratic process inside the council. So we have to look to the responses to that engagement to develop what our proposals might be in response to that, and then we bring that to the Transport and Environment Committee, and that will be in June. So what will be contained in that report is not only an analysis of the consultation and the market research, but also an understanding of how that fits within our overall goals for the city, goals which have already been agreed through committee. They're already sort of on the books, so to speak. Those findings will be brought forward to the Transport Committee in June. But all the way along, we have also been reviewing the temporary spaces for people schemes against the criteria set out in various committee reports. The most recent one of that was in January 28th. So all of that is building our degree of knowledge about what is working, what isn't working, what we can change, what is impossible to change, and all of that will be built into the report that's coming in June. So the decision on whether or not to proceed with taking schemes forward, going forward, all of that requires, and has required during this last year, committee approval. And at the committee, I convened that committee, and I can tell you that the degree of conversation that's taken place and the degree of scrutiny that's taken place around the scheme has been thorough, it's been welcome, and it's been helpful in terms of taking us forward and understanding exactly what we can and should deliver for the city. So if our proposals are accepted at that June Transport Committee, we will then move into the traffic regulation order, which again will allow us to have the more statutory form of consultation where appropriate. I think that's me really to the end of my particular piece. I'm going to hand over to Phil at the moment. However, I would like to say one thing. There are enormous areas of misinformation that are sitting out there in the city about the motivation behind this effort that we've had to date, our motivation in terms of taking it potentially forward into the future, and about process and about how we've gone about doing it. If you have any questions about that, I'd be very happy to answer them in the Q&A session. But rest assured, we are comfortable with the process that we've gone through, despite criticisms that are often based on not quite fully understanding how we're going about doing things. And we are confident that the decisions that we've been making and the process that we've been followed sits well within the Scottish Government guidelines and within the legal requirements for us to move forward on these schemes. Can I hand over to you now, Phil, please?
Sure, Lesley. I'm trying to just, good, I think you can now see me. So I'm not going to take very long. I'm just going to briefly talk about a little bit more about the work that we've done on segregated cycle lanes, a little bit about schools, a little bit about the what we've called spaces for exercise element of our programme. So I'm just going to pick some examples. So on the first, the segregated cycleways, the primary objectives of this program were one, to give people an alternative option to using public transport at a time when bus capacity has been very limited for reasons to do with the pandemic. And some of the routes are also aimed at providing people with safe on-road cycling and mitigating some of the crowding that was actually taking place on the off-road network, particularly in the early stages of the pandemic. As the weather gets better again, we're again seeing pretty high levels of use on the off-road network. I'll just pick up, there's many roads around, quite a large number of roads around the city where we have now got some segregated cycling in place. Examples include Crewe Road South, Old Dogheath Road, Ferry Road, Queensferry Road, Milton Road, Willowborough Road, Coniston Road. And I'll just maybe look at the corridor coming in from Coniston Road, and what we've done there is put segregated cycle lanes, temporary segregated cycle lanes on Coniston Road itself, and those come down from Fairmile Head to Greenbank. And then from the Greenbank crossroads, we've just recently put in place a series of road closures, point road closures. I think there's 3 of them between there and the Meadows, to provide a quiet alternative route to Morningside Road for cyclists who are wishing to head on towards the city centre. So those 2 things were very different kinds of interventions join up. We've also at the same time introduced a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit on Coniston Road rather than the previous 40-mile-an-hour limit. We've put in a lot of measures, just under 60 measures at schools around the city, and those have ranged from a number of street closures. There's around about 12 full road closures in place. Quite a few access restrictions, so where only residents only are allowed into the street during the whole day, and then some pavement extensions and a number of more minor things that are very specifically COVID related around signing people in and out of schools via different entrances and so on. So we've had a lot of feedback about a lot of the projects, and not only certainly we've had some of the projects have been quite contentious. We have had positive feedback about the segregated cycle lanes. We've had a lot of verbal positive feedback from parents about the school measures, and we will be looking, as Lesley said, we'll be looking at these at the school measures, at the segregated cycling measures, and at the other aspects of spaces for people against a range of criteria that were agreed at the Transport and Environment Committee in January. I'll just talk briefly about what those criteria are in a minute. Before I do that, I'll just touch on one of the other areas of work that one of the other programme areas, and that's the spaces for exercise. And one particular example there, which was quite an early project that we implemented, was Silverknowes Road North. And that's, for those of you who don't know, it's a wide road which heads from the Silverknowes area down towards Silverknowes Prom, and was previously open to all traffic. That was closed to motor traffic last May. Just recently, very recently, it's been reopened to buses only, but there's now a two-way segregated cycleway which takes up half of the road, and that, combined with measures through the built-up area in Silverknowes, provides quite a nice connection from North Edinburgh Path network down to Silverknowes Promenade. There are some other things that Spaces for Exercise programme. So a couple of things at Portobello. We've removed some car parking in the King's Place area, and that's enabled just more space for pedestrians, and more space for cyclists as well. We've put in a new crossing over Maybury Road, and that's been in also for now. I think it's since about June last year, which enables people from the local area there to access a quiet road on the other side of Maybury Road, Camo Walk, and that road has also been closed to motor traffic. And again, this has been about giving people space for outdoor exercise. As we all know, there's been a lot more people out walking and cycling over the last year than normal. Just in the last couple of minutes, I'll just talk you briefly through the criteria that we're going to look at projects against before, as officers, coming back to the committee and making recommendations for what projects might stay in place, either experimentally or on a more permanent basis. We're going to look at how the projects act to encourage walking and cycling. We're going to look at impacts on the street environment, and so more broadly than just the movement, thinking about things like space for street cafes, for example, because some of the interventions have been in the city centre. We're going to look at what impacts, if any, there are on public transport. Some of the schemes might have had the potential to have some negative impact on public transport. Others, we've actually provided additional bus priority. We're going to look at the impact of schemes on traffic disturbance. So some of the schemes have a few road closures have reduced traffic disturbance, but we have had there's been some diversion of traffic, and that's created some issues around some of the projects. And we'll be looking at impacts on residents, for example, their ability to park, impacts on businesses, and impacts on disabled people. So that's all going to be, we'll be looking at the results of the consultation that's going on just now, results of the market research, and looking at schemes against these criteria, and reporting back to Transport and Environment Committee in June, and then the committee will decide on the way forward for these projects. So I think that's me up against my time. So I'll hand back over to, I can't remember if it's Martin or Dave.
It's myself, Dave, here. Thanks very much, Councillor Macinnes and Phil, for a lot of useful background. It's great to see a lot of questions coming in. Also, thanks very much for keeping to time, and I'm sure our next three speakers will follow your great example in that regard. It's great to see the number of people here at this meeting. We've had several public meetings with over 100 people at them before, but you'll be interested to know there's over 150 at this one just now. So our final three speakers. There are an increasing number of local groups in many parts of Edinburgh which are campaigning for safer and less traffic-dominated streets in their area. So we've now got three people from different parts of the city to talk for up to 5 minutes each on local aspects of spaces for people, what is good and what improvements are needed. So our first speaker is Jocelyn Dellar. Jocelyn, if you could get your camera and audio working. Jocelyn is a local mum who's involved in our Spokes-Porty local group. So there you are. I'll pass over to you now, Jocelyn. Thanks.
Hi there. I'm sorry I don't have anything to share with you, but my computer has, my printer has had a breakdown. So I can't print out my notes and show you something at the same time. So you'll just have to listen. So, as you know, you've just heard, my name's Jocelyn Dellar. I'm a parent with a child at Duddingston Primary School. We commute to and from school along Duddingston Road, and for most of you that you may not know the area, the road is home to a skate park, 2 primary schools, several nurseries, and it has high schools on either end, Holyrood High School, about a quarter of a mile along at Duddingston Road West, and Portobello High School just a few streets away at the other end. So the street is full of children all the time. When the orcas were installed under the Spaces for People project, it made a huge change to the usability of the road for cyclists. In creating a segregated path, the council made it possible for parents and children to cycle to school together at their own pace without being pressurised by cars to increase speed. The children are only recently back to school, but already I've seen more parents taking their children to school by bike. I guess the answer is if you build it, they will come. Another drastic change has been to the safety of the school commute, which has improved. The road at the school start and end times used to be filled with drivers making bad decisions, speeding, turning in the road, parking illegally, mounting the pavements, and so on. The numbers of cars waiting outside the school also increased air pollution, as many of the drivers would sit inside their cars with the engines idling rather than getting out to meet their children. Since Spaces for People, I'm happy to report there are only 1 or 2 cars parking illegally, and the road is quieter, safer, and less polluted. And we don't even have a permanent system in that yet. That said, there are definitely still improvements to be made in the Duddingston Road scheme. The road crossing warden needs to move closer to the new location of St John's. The warden is still located at the St John's previous site on the corner of Duddingston Road and Hamilton Terrace. Now that we have a cycle lane on that side, the cyclists are forced to stop on the junction if people are crossing at that point. So that can be quite distressing to the children. Small tweak, the rest of it has been universally given thumbs up from all the parents I've spoken to. Closing the gaps, though, will make the route safer. The spaces between the orcas still make it possible for the drivers to park illegally, which they do. The number of drivers doing this has reduced enormously, as I've said, but it still does cause problems. So it means that children cycling along the lane have to mount the pavement whenever they come across a car and then go back down onto the cycle path. Obviously, adults can pull out into the road. But again, with the amount of parents turning up at school start and leaving times, it's not great. At any rate, I do feel safe taking my son on the cycle lane and Duddingston Road now, and that is something I would never have considered saying prior to the orcas going in. One thing I do feel, though, is that if this system is ever to go permanent, then they need to really look at redesigning the junctions. At this point, there's a tricky problem with cyclists coming out of the bike lanes and moving into a shared space with cars. So I believe if the Duddingston lane is going to become permanent, it really would be a fantastic thing for the whole area. I do believe that sharing the space is fair, practical, and reduces conflict and increases safety. Everyone has the right to commute safely, and if older children on bikes are able to use a bike lane instead of cycling on the pavement, it's going to be considerably safer for the pedestrians. And while many cyclists are confident in traffic and don't mind cycling alongside cars, segregated lanes allow a wider variety of people to commute by bike. Family groups, slower cyclists, people with trailers and disability bikes will all benefit from an infrastructure that puts their safety first. It makes absolute economic and environmental sense to incorporate the Spaces for People change into the bigger long-term goals of the City Mobility Plan and the Active Travel Action Plan. We can't sustain a car-centred society, and change is coming whether we want it or not. So let's make sure we don't waste the work that's been done in SFP. Duddingston Road needs a bike lane on both sides to accommodate children commuting to and from school. The route needs to be expanded to bring them safely to Holyrood High School and Portobello High School. We know already that traffic testing has shown that the temporary bike lane has caused an overall reduction in the speed of traffic on Duddingston Road. It's already a safer place for the many children who use it, and we'd love to see that made permanent. In conclusion, you're never going to provide a solution that everybody likes. This is simply not achievable because we all have such a wide variety of road users with different needs. What I think is essential, however, is that the road is shared properly so that each type of road user, pedestrians, cyclists, drivers, are not brought into conflict with each other. Adding a safe, segregated bike route allows children to cycle on the road instead of on the pavement, removing one conflict between pedestrians and cyclists. It allows cyclists to make a safe road choice which will not bring them into conflict with drivers. Everybody wins. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Jocelyn. So it's great to hear how council policies are actually working out at a local level, and some of the great things that are happening, as well as some of the problems that need improved. So our next local speaker is from Christorfin, and that's Cllr Connachan. If you could put on your audio and video now, Cllr. Cllr is a real local walking and cycling champion. Don't look too embarrassed, Cllr. Involved with living streets as well as with spokes. And Cllr has helped with many of our spokes responses to council consultations affecting West Edinburgh. So over to you, Cllr.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have slides either. Actually, one of the reasons why I don't have slides is because there's not been a huge amount of cycling interventions that have come to the west part of the city so far. Christorfin, for those that aren't local to the area, is well known for being highly polluted, a lot of air pollution, a lot of congestion. The city mobility plan has placed Christorfin as a real problem area that needs to be looked at. So for me, as a person that walks and cycles, these spaces for people interventions, I think, have been very positive. They have been mostly walking based. The big ones, I would say, are the Christorfin town centre has had additional pavement widening given for people walking to the shops, which is great because you get a lot more space. There used to be very narrow pavements before, and wonderfully a lot of clutter has been removed, which is great because there used to be a lot of guardrails, a lot of extraneous clutter, and that's really helped to make the pavements much clearer, which has been brilliant. So that's been really positive. We've also had some school closures in the area, so we've had local access only around some of the local primary schools, which I believe has been very popular and made a really positive difference for the children walking and cycling to school and being able to get that physical distance, and for parents as well. And Phil mentioned earlier the Camel Walk closure, which has also been super duper popular, and that's been really good for people walking and cycling. I have been along the Camel Walk quite a lot since lockdown started last year, and it is always absolutely packed with people now. I remember going along in January and it was like a freezing cold day and the road was absolutely mobbed with people walking and cycling. And I saw also a person with a mobility scooter, so that was great. So it's been a really positive change, I think, for the area, these kinds of interventions. Cycling wise, there's not actually been that much directly related to cycling, but I would say that some of the pedestrianisation measures have helped tangentially with cycling. So there have been some tightened junctions around the local primary schools around Christorfin High Street, and the tightened junction radii have made it a bit safer for cyclists because cars are going a bit more slowly. They're being a little bit more careful about turning corners and negotiating junctions, so that's been pretty positive. There's also some build outs on the high street which has made the traffic speeds a little bit slower, which again I think will be beneficial for people that are already cycling. So that's pretty positive. The school street closures are obviously really helpful too, because that's allowing school children to walk and cycle to school more safely, and I think that's super important. I kind of think of school children as sort of an indicator species. You know that if kids are cycling to school and walking to school, that the roads are safe enough for everybody. So I would really like to see more focus on the primary schools and the high schools in the area to really help improve the cycling access and permeability for folk that want to do the school run on a bike. The one I'm looking forward to, which is going to be great when that comes in, is Meadow Place Road, which is a cycling specific intervention, and that is going to be some protected cycleway on either side of the road. Meadow Place Road has cycle lanes in place at the moment, but they're just painted, and I think that once that protected cycle space goes in, that's going to make a significant difference for young people looking to access the high schools, St Augustine and Foresters, and also it'll be great because we'll have a north-south cycle route, because Christorfin doesn't really have anything on any main roads at the moment, and the north-south desire lines are very difficult on a bike at the moment, so I think that will be really positive when it goes in. If I had to ask, I mean, I just ask for more generally, more walking, more cycling interventions, please. They really do make a difference. But the key thing, the big one, would be an A8 protected cycleway. I think that's super important, absolutely key for the area. It connects really important spaces together. The the shopping centre, the main town centre, the Gyle, the city centre, and connecting into the Roseburn, the existing Roseburn cycle route that's going in at the moment. So it would be fantastic if we could get some main road protected provision for the local area, because it would make a huge difference. Thanks very much. That's me.
Thanks very much, Claire. Well, that's great to hear the interaction of how the SFP facilities can help both walking and cycling. And I know that the A8 cycle is a really major thing that many people are disappointed hasn't turned up in SFP. But in relation to the interaction between walking and cycling, Spokes has always been, our official objectives are cycling within an overall sustainable transport strategy. So we're very strongly in favour of measures in support of walking and of bus. Now, from Blackford Safe Routes in South Edinburgh, we've got Ewen MacLean. If you could put your video and audio on, Ewen. Ewen's the local dad who helped set up a school bike bus a couple of years ago and has been campaigning for safe routes to and from the school and a lot more. So over to you, Ewen.
Thanks very much indeed, Dave. Yeah, I'll be very quick. There's a lot to say on this matter. So what I'm presenting here really is the experience we've had with the Greenbank to Meadows quiet route, which is an implementation of what I suppose some people now call low traffic neighbourhoods or livable neighbourhoods. And it's been immensely beneficial. I mean, more so than probably I predicted even so. And so the notion of what's happened here is it's taken some initial designs we actually came up with before COVID, and we presented Lesley Macinnes, who was very helpful. And what's happened is through the Spaces for People scheme, this quiet route has been implemented as a sort of subset of what we've done. And the premise of the scheme is that you have this notion of modal filter, which means there's no through traffic for cars or vans, but it does allow walking, cycling, wheeling. And there's various modal filters, and the map you can see online in various places, but it allows people to be able to walk and cycle from the south part of the city, from Greenbank part, all the way to join up to the meadows. And it allows them to do so without cycling alongside or walking alongside through traffic. So one of the things that I would just show as an image, first of all, is we did identify very much a need. This is one of our bike buses, which goes along this route. Sometimes we have 200 or so people going on these bike buses, and what we get told all the time is that people would love to do this all the time if they could, but they just don't feel safe enough to do so, because White House Loan itself, particularly this section of White House Loan you're looking at now, is very, very dangerous. And it's not just for the through traffic, but it's also those of us that have children know that as you walk along a road, walking your children even, the noise, the pollution, the panic you feel when you have cars going there is very difficult. And in fact, outside our school, I'll just show you some pictures. This is kind of what it looked like. And if I look at this and try and be as objective as possible, I find this really difficult to look at. This is what the outside of our school, where we have children waiting outside, waiting to go into school, looking at. So thanks very much to the Spaces for People measures. What's happened is that we've introduced various modal filters, and it sections off. You can still get everywhere pretty much by car, but just not the through route. And it sections off various bits of the roads. And now what we're seeing is really enormous take up of active travel routes to school from people that previously may not have done this. So cycling and walking as well, walking up White House Loan. And as I say, walking is enormously benefited from this because it's quieter and it's safer. You don't feel the difficulty of worrying about lots of traffic coming past and having to continually grab your children and make sure that they look careful across the road and so on. It is a much, much nicer environment to be in. And what I feel very strongly about this is it's allowed us as parents and allowed us as a community to enjoy this space. I hope that as this does make it made permanent, I mean, the benefits are enormous. And I hope that when it gets made permanent, we get to put, for example, planters in, which would increase community engagement. But it allows us to model to our children really necessary measures about traveling more actively through the city. So walking and cycling, rather than a really car-dominated model, and it's in line with the city mobility plan and the notion of the 15-minute neighbourhood, 20-minute neighbourhood has been referenced already. And I would echo very strongly what Dave said in his excellent introduction, which is that we're not really taking away from people an ability to cycle, ability to drive wherever they want. That this ability to go places safely with your children has been taken away from us. I can't go with my own children, who are very capable cyclists, to certain things because the roads are just too dangerous. It's an absolute environmental, social, and societal imperative that we model to our children better and more sustainable ways of travelling around our city. And it's certainly the movement that's going. So I hope by seeing these pictures that I'm showing you here, you can see the difference it's made to us all as a community. And you can see further down the route, these people coming from further south. We've done, thanks very much to Stella and to John Robson as well from Spokes South. We've been doing some surveys about who's been walking, and you see that walking and cycling uptake is really very impressive in this area. Lots of people are now cycling to school. This is just P1 and P2 bikes on the week after it started. If I were to point out a couple of things I would like to see done better, it would be that on the south end of our route in particular, there's not very much infrastructure being put in. So particularly around Cluny Gardens and Hermitage Garrett Drive, really I think more modal filters need to be put in there, and equally modal filters need to be considered in various places where certain cars have diverted down perhaps older routes, and there has been some criticism, justifiably, from some residents saying that these roads are now being used by cars that previously weren't. So it would be good to consider this use of modal filter. The great advantage of using a modal filter is they're very easily adaptable. It's incredibly simple to move them and to test what's worked, and it allows for traffic evaporation. It allows for modal shift. We're already seeing that. We're already seeing that lots of people that previously drove because they were too worried to walk or cycle with their children on the way to school are now feeling much safer to do so. And yeah, I'll just leave you with, thanks very much for listening. I'll just leave you with a happy picture of this is, what it looks like outside our school, and it really is quite uplifting, I have to say, having put it in.
Thanks, Ewan. That's fantastic. Seeing all those pictures and what you were saying about being able to learn from experience, and improvements that can now be made to those schemes as we go forwards. So thanks very much to our three local speakers. Before we go on to the QA, I've just got a few spokes announcements to make. We always have a wee announcement session in the middle. We're really very keen for you to take part in the council online consultation. They want to know what you like, and they want to know what improvements you'd like to see. And we do know from social media that some people will be asking for everything to be scrapped. So please do respond to the consultation. Just because of what you've seen tonight to pictures of what's in place at the moment, don't assume that everything is going to be fine anyway. It's up to you. Please take part in that consultation. Now, a couple of specifically spokes announcements, and more about these will appear on our website in the next week or two, and details will be emailed to members. So please do join spokes to keep in touch, see our website for joining. But the two things that are coming up, first of all, we're going to be running a competition on cycling during the pandemic. And this could be a story of how your family's travel patterns have changed, or it could be some particular incident that's happened, or it could be how a Spaces for People scheme has helped you. Your entries can be a story, they can be pictures, or they can be a video. One criterion is they must be based in Edinburgh or the Lothians. The closing date will be sometime this spring, not our usual autumn closing date. And there's some fantastic prizes which will be listed on the website together with the bike shops and others who are offering these prizes. But the prizes include a £60 bike shop voucher, a £100 top of the range bike service, day hires of an e-bike and of a cargo bike, a £500 voucher towards buying a cargo bike, a £100 voucher towards buying an e-bike. So I don't know how you can resist not entering this competition. And the other spokes thing that's coming up is we're very much hoping to put on a Lothians area hustings for the May the 5th Scottish Parliament elections. The hustings will be in mid-April, the dates and the speakers still to be announced. So there will be an article about that on our website. And also in that article, we will mention some of the national elections events and information which are being organised by Walk, Wheel, Cycle, Vote, which is an umbrella organisation of organisations across Scotland involved in walking, wheeling and cycling, and also events put on by Cycling UK Scotland. All those details will be in the article on our website. So now we move on to the section where you have an input, the question and answer. And Carolyn, if you could put on your video and audio. Dr. Carolyn Brown from the Urban Institute at Heriot-Watt University is chairing our QA. Many of you will know Caroline from chairing previous meetings. She's got a great knack of getting to the heart of the matter and ensuring that speakers do answer the question, and all in the nicest possible way, of course. So over to you, Carolyn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, could I invite our panelists to rejoin us, please, on screen so we can see you all? That would be lovely. And while we're waiting, Lesley, Phil, yes, there's Claire, and Jocelyn as well, I think, if you could rejoin, that would be brilliant. So we've had some questions in advance, so thank you for those. We've got questions that are coming in. I have a team, a whole team of people filtering your questions, organising them into themes, flagging them with colours so I know which ones are top of the list. And it's fair to say that there are some common themes that are coming up amongst those questions. So I thought I'd start with the big question, if you like, which is, so we've heard the really impressive work that's been going on, and I think one of the things I'm conscious of, I see things happening in my bit of town on the south side, and I didn't really have the full picture of all of the other things put together, so it was really helpful for Lesley and Phil to give us that whole picture. So there are a couple of questions which are about the kind of strategic choices that were made, and if you like, the rationale for some places to have measures and other places to not have measures. So there are two questions here, and apologies if I mangle your name. So Bo Adamczyk has asked us about the Cairns area. Why aren't there any SFP projects there? There's 5 schools, they say, so why not that part of town? And also David Buchanan made another sort of Cllr around southwest Edinburgh, sort of Collington, Belerno, noting about the capacity and the water of Leaf and the canal towpaths and things becoming very busy. So I think that's part of this kind of strategic picture, the bigger picture about why and where certain parts of town have got interventions and others haven't. So who wants to take it, Phil or Lesley?
I'll take the kind of broad principle part, and then maybe Phil can come in with a bit more information about some of the specific elements of the question you're putting there. You know, we didn't start with a blank piece of paper. We had an existing city with constraints already built into it, whether you're talking about, you know, road width, whether you're talking about the position of certain facilities like schools or shops and so on. So it's almost inevitable that we had to look at the overall city and say, well, where can we get the most benefit out of what is relatively limited funding for what we're trying to achieve? Everybody, I think, outside of the council or outside these kinds of processes who haven't had experience of this tends to underestimate the level of funding required, the level of detailed design required, and the length of time it takes to put things in. So almost inevitably, we had to go for some of the measures that could be implemented relatively quickly and give us the greatest degree of benefit across the city. I've seen one or two commentators talk about, well, you know, we haven't got this in this part of the city, we haven't got an equivalent in here, but it was for us very much a city-wide approach. Where could we make the biggest impact and deliver the most in terms of the COVID response? it was really important for us to be able to do that without the kind of, we must have, we must split the city into 4 and we must spend equally in 4 different places. And some of those kind of demands are coming forward. And it just doesn't work when you're actually looking at a transport network which doesn't stop in quadrants. It crosses over, and we have to take into account all of those things. So some of the measures, for example, would also relate to existing infrastructure that was in, where we'd be able to link up to it to make logical journeys, to allow people to travel into the hospitals, getting the stuff into Old Dalkeith Road and onto Crewe Road South were 2 of the early projects that we did precisely to meet the needs of the hospital community. So there are a number of different reasons as to why we chose what we chose to do. And we went through quite a rigorous process to try and establish what should be done in the city. And we took that through a democratic process at committee. We have brought it in front of committee all the time. So the democratic representatives have had a chance to pore over these things and to try to find a way through choices of that nature.
Thanks, Lesley. Phil, is there anything you wanted to add there? Oh, you're on mute, my dear.
Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me now? Sorry, I'm going to disappoint you because I actually the audio was muted on my side. I didn't actually hear the question. So I don't think it's very sensible for me to try and answer a question I didn't hear unless you want to repeat it.
Okay, I tell you what, let's move on because I think there are quite a lot of questions and there's potentially quite a lot of detail to get into. So that first question was kind of a strategic one about the locations for the interventions. And perhaps if we can move on then to more detailed questions, and there are several here about the design of the infrastructure that's gone in, particularly on the segregated cycle lanes. So we've got Colin Jopper and Douglas Patterson both sent in questions in advance, which are really about this, about why did you choose, or why were they designed in that way, the width of them, the choice of wands and the curb or bollard choices, and also this question about the sort of maintenance then of those lanes and how do those things fit together? Phil, if I can ask you to start with that, maybe Lesley can come in. And I should have said to the others, if you want to come in, please wave at me, raise your hand. I can see you all the time. So if you've got a hot point you want to make, you've got a hot take, you need to share, just put your hand up. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll try and deal with what we've done. So what materials we've used, what the widths are, and the maintenance, because I think those were the broad themes. At the very beginning, we had a look at what kind of infrastructure, what kind of materials were available, and we actually sort of progressed as time went on, because at the very beginning, really the only thing we could get access to was cones, and then the temporary, I would call them wands, the orange and white things kind of stick to the road. And that's what was in place early on, well, in fact, cones were in place first, and then the wands were in place actually from the very beginning on Old Dalkeith Road and Crewe Road South. And that's because they're easy to get from traffic management contractors. They use them on motorways and things, so we could get hold of those quite quickly. But it was very clear to us that if we were going to be keeping these things in for more than weeks, then we needed something that was more robust. So we had a look around at what the options were and what suppliers could actually deliver to us within a reasonable timescale. Because remember that there was quite a significant amount of money being made in Scotland and across the UK for this kind of thing. So a whole lot of councils were going to suppliers and trying to get stuff at the same time. So what we concluded was that we wanted to go for something that was fairly standardised. So we weren't looking at lots of different materials. There are 1 or 2 different materials left around the city now for cycling segregation, but most of it is of one kind. And it's a fairly robust thing, sort of like 2 meters long, 200 millimeters wide, very robust rubber. It's got some reflective stuff on it. And then it's got some extremely strong and robust, strong in terms of the fact they're designed to be hit at 60 miles an hour and not be destroyed. These plastic one things that stick out of them. So we ordered thousands of these things because once we had an idea of the scale of what we were going to be able to do, and those have been delivered over time. So we went for this standard approach so that we didn't have multiple different types of stuff around. In terms of the widths, then we've very much been for the segregated cycling. It's been about balancing getting the maximum possible width for comfortable cycling on the one hand, and on the other hand, we've been looking at where people there's often some need for people to and certainly demand for people to park for maybe some people don't have off-street residential car parking, so there's no driveway. So we've tried to provide for people to park on street where that's possible, and sometimes there's a need for some loading as well. So we'll with that obviously takes space, and then there's a critical need that actually has really come to fruition this winter to be able for something like a snowplow to be able to pass a bus in the middle of a street that's got this stuff on, without actually hitting the segregators, and that was something that was quite important to us in designing. So we need the segregators to be roughly 6.5 meters apart in order to be able to do that. And we're also looking at being able to maintain the cycle lanes, and for that you need to be able to get a mini sweeper or ideal, and also a mini snow plow if you can, inside the cycle lane. So that's meant that in some places, that's meant that we actually had to take out bits of segregation when we moved to the more permanent, robust material. So our old Dalkeith Road ended up with a bit less of the more robust segregation than we'd initially had in with the ones, and that's because we couldn't get a snowplow past the bus, and we certainly didn't want to end up in a situation where you had two large vehicles got stuck and ambulances couldn't get to and from the hospital. So broadly speaking, that's where we've been. In the maintenance, we've actually brought in some. We've hired some. My understanding is we've used some additional temporary staff, or perhaps brought in council staff who are doing other things to drive some of the snowplow things in the winter, and we have been doing some additional cleaning of the cycle lanes. That's come in over time, and I think there were a few hiccups early on. A lot of leaves inconveniently all fell at once, and it took us a while to sort of get the sweeping regime properly in place for that. But I think we have got that now in place.
Lesley,
yes, thank you. Thank you. I'd echo all that Phil has said there. I think it's interesting maybe to take a slight step back and talk about the impact of what we've been putting in. So in the early days when we were talking about cones or the lighter wands, what we did see was an enormous amount of interference with those schemes, and that produced a lot of criticism. And I think, unfortunately, it reflects a lack of willingness to accept change. The change has been brought in because the city needs it, because we saw an awful lot of people resisting that and removing the cones. We're still seeing it with some of the barriers, around school closures, that kind of thing. People who think that the right to drive in a place that isn't supposed to be driven in trumps everything else. And so the fact that we've now been able to move to better quality infrastructure, I think, is encouraging, because it's reducing some of that degree of interference with what we're trying to achieve, and it allows us to put more resource into further development. Clearly, as we go forward, if we take some of these schemes forward permanently, and clearly it's got to be a decision made in the round through a number of different means, the consultation is only one of them, we will have to look to make more permanent infrastructure at some point. But that, of course, is dependent on funding, on our ability to design in some of that better quality long-term material, and that will be something that we look forward to very much indeed. On the terms of the winter weather issue, yes, we did have some issues in the early days of the bad snowfall and the bad ice and so on, and Phil's mentioned the leaf issue as well. As soon as that happened, I asked our senior officers to start to look at a fresh look at how we accommodate spaces for people going into next winter. So there are reports coming back to committee which will take quite a detailed look at the lessons learned from this winter around spaces for people and the wider piece around winter weather maintenance across all of our road network, or road and footway network, I should say, because I'm particularly concerned that we start to get it better for the city in a number of different ways. So there is work ongoing on that at the moment.
Good, that's excellent, because you sort of answered, I think, there were a couple of people that are making those points about not only current maintenance, but also future maintenance and how that might fit in. So you've covered that one. Thank you, Lesley. So linked to those points about the design of the particularly the segregated cycleways and the maintenance of those, I think there were a couple of people that had questions about enforcement around parking. Now, Jocelyn mentioned it in her really nice piece about Duddingston and the experiences there, but we've also got a question that's come in on that about this issue about the spacing of the defenders and then being able to sort of angle in or park across a cycleway as a result. So yeah, what can you tell us about parking enforcement in the spaces for people context, please? Lesley, do you want to take that?
Thank you. Yes, it is a thorny problem. And it was before spaces for people, and it will be after we move on to a different stage in terms of development. We basically have a lot of drivers, delivery drivers, private cars, taxis, and so on, who tend to feel that they've got the ability to park wherever they want to, wherever they feel they need to. And clearly, this is a very transitional scheme. This is challenging for an awful lot of people around driver behaviour. And the more that we bring this scheme in and get it established in the city, I think we'll see fewer examples of that poor quality decision making as far as parking behaviour is concerned. We saw one on Forest Road being circulated in social media yesterday from the Royal Mail that had gone in and parked in the cycle lane, with absolutely no concern for the vulnerability and the safety of people trying to use that cycle lane. And it's a particularly busy road. It's one I know very well. It used to be on my daily commute into the city chamber, sorry. But we also get cars in that area and Forest Road, vans and vehicles on that Forest Road that go up and park entirely on the pavement. And there are lots of other locations across the city where they see the same thing. Enforcement is definitely an issue. I'm talking to our senior officers about how we can better calibrate some of that. Some of it will get ironed out because people will realise that they're getting called out on social media, that there are all sorts of other things going on, sort of soft enforcement, if you want to call it that, that's going on there. And we're talking directly to some companies who are, inveterate offenders of that kind of thing. However, the one thing I would say is that the more segregated cycle lanes and the more extended pavement walkways that we've got, the less opportunity there will be for those kinds of behaviours.
Phil, did you want to add anything?
I don't think there's really much to add to that. So just one little design thing in that we did think about the ability of people to get between the defenders in the design. So we've adjusted the spacing according to how much pressure there is on how much parking pressure there is. So I think you'll notice that in the town centres, the defenders tend to be quite a lot closer together, and they're a bit further apart on most of the segregated cycle lanes. But still in the main, spaced so that it's difficult to get a car in between them. There's obviously, and what we're doing is there's obviously a trade-off between making it impossible to get a car in between two of these things and the price, because they can't, each one of them is including installation, you're talking £300 or so. So and there's quite a lot of length. So we need to. There's a cost element there as well.
I just wanted, I'd just like to invite Ewen and possibly Claire as well to just say something about this kind of parking issue in their experience in the schemes that they've described. Jocelyn told us really nicely about her experience, but I just wonder if Ewen has got anything to add about this sort of people driving cars, taking liberties with some of these interventions and just driving around them or ignoring them, and what's the experience in your view? Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the main point I'd like to make here is that these interventions are spaces for people stuff and the sort of infrastructure you're seeing. You have to view them in a long-term view. Things are not going to change the day after they get put in. It was outside our school, certainly double parking outside the school, antisocial parking was a real problem. It's actually much less now than it was. And one of the reasons for that is because the school has been excellently engaging with people to tell them about this particular quiet route. Also because a lot of people, as I mentioned, are now walking or cycling, or some people who feel that they need to drive, some people have to drive, are parking a bit further away and walking into school and trying to build that in. My main view on this is, of course, it's a problem in terms of antisocial people, this sort of antisocial behaviour and people exploiting what they feel is their right to do so in cars without necessarily considering the safety of other people. But actually, the long-term view of modal shift, long-term view of getting people to model better, more sustainable patterns and all the rest of it, the long-term view of giving people alternatives so that traffic volume comes down means that, as is demonstrable everywhere with these sorts of schemes being put in across the world, that what happens is that you get behavioural shift because of these sorts of infrastructure, and you get people actually taking up other types of travel, and is that we have less car dependence. There will of course be some people who still need to drive, there's no doubt about that, but the fewer cars there are, less traffic volume, the more it is possible for people to be able to do that in a sort of responsible way.
Thanks, Ewen. Claire, did you want to add anything about the parking and enforcement issue?
Well, parking and enforcement is a long-standing topic of discussion in Corstorphine. There's a CPZ consultation going on at the moment with respect to irresponsible parking in Corstorphine. So there's various views about this. Some people are adamant there's no parking issues. Other people are very much on the opposite side of discussion. So as you would expect in a community, there's various views about it. But with respect to spaces for people interventions, I can think specifically about the primary schools with some of the road closures, the local access, and I have seen instances where people have moved the barriers out the way so that, you know, vehicles can get down the road, etc. So there has been a little bit of that. I don't have any kids at the school, so I can't give you like a really in-depth you know, amount of feedback on it, but I have seen some cheekiness. There has been some additional measures put around Corstorphine Primary School in the last few weeks to try and tackle significant amount of pavement parking and really irresponsible behaviour from drivers around about the school run times, pick up and drop off. So, you know, fingers crossed that will help to make a difference. And as Phil noted earlier, the infrastructure that's been put down is sort of semi-permanent in the sense that it's much more difficult for people driving to move these things out of the way or to be able to squeeze the cars over them or whatever. So fingers crossed that will really help with some of the issues that certainly Corstorphine Primary School's been seeing in the morning and the afternoon drop off. So fingers crossed.
All right, thanks very much. I think let's move on. Thank you. And that was Mike Armstrong that was one of the people that asked the question about enforcement. So thanks, Mike, for that. Let's move on then. There's a couple of questions which are really about the kind of impacts. And Phil, you've told us that part of the next phase of work is looking at the impacts on different aspects of streets and transport, public transport, buses, also looking at impacts on shops. And we've got a question about that. Let me just find the name of the person. So Douglas Patterson says, have you taken into account or looked at the impact of changes to parking on local shops and the cycle and goes on that the cycle lanes, along with COVID, have killed many small businesses?
I'll pick this one up.
Who wants to take it? Lesley, Councillor Macinnes.
And then maybe Phil can come in on this. This is a very difficult and thorny issue, because operating in a city as a resident or as a business, I think you have to accept the fact that there will be change. Cities never stand still, they're constantly changing. And in this particular instance, we have put in measures around spaces for people to try to support those small businesses by creating space for people to be able to mingle outside a shop while they're waiting. You know, there was at one point, there was a lot of talk about, you know, only 2 people in a shop at one time, depending on its size. You know, that kind of measure was being required of businesses. And so the widening of pavements was partly to allow easy queuing without the risk without increased risk of infection. And it was also to allow people to pass and therefore feel comfortable in the area. A direct degree of support. The problem that we've found is an awful lot of businesses have supposed that much of their business arrives by car. And we know from studies done right across the world, and in fact, we had a committee paper, I asked for a committee paper to come forward to look at this particular issue. We know that the research says that people who walk and cycle in an area tend to spend more. And that shopkeepers, for example, I'm only using retail because obviously there are other businesses impacted too, but if we look at retail, that a lot of retailers rather overestimate the number of customers, the level of custom that comes from the car, and therefore the importance of parking for the success of their business. Now I'm sure that is a hard message for retailers, particularly small retailers who are perhaps struggling to hear, but we know that there is research done that indicates that that's quite clearly the case. So, you know, it's very difficult when businesses are operating in such a difficult environment as this, for people to see that rounded picture, and almost inevitably any change that we implement on the street will be seen as the cause of difficulty rather than actually a transition towards a much better situation, which has been proven time and time again in shopping streets the world over, that where walkers and cyclists linger longer, want to be there because it's a better environment, and spend more. Now that's obviously, I'm speaking in great generalities, it obviously depends on the nature of your business, but that is certainly the case. And we have seen in town centres across the city, we have seen queues outside retail stores. There was one on social media the other day about one of the, I can't remember what the business is, it's a takeaway food business in Bruntsfield, and there was a queue of about 150 metres long. Well, how do we accommodate that safely without taking the kind of measures that we've been looking at? So there's a number of factors that sit under there, and I have enormous sympathy with businesses and their concerns at the moment. But we have to, as a council, look at this in the round and try and find those supportive measures in exactly the same way that we've done a Leith Walk. We've put enormous effort in there around the tram to support the local businesses. And that's our attitude. We want to support where we can. But unfortunately, we get a lot of criticism back because people don't understand the rounded context of what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Lesley. Phil, just before you answer, maybe I can just add in a little supplement on this question about impacts on businesses. Robin Wicks has asked what the sort of specific assessment criteria are and the time period for the assessment. So if you could thread that into your answer, that'd be wonderful.
Okay. I think so. It's our role as officers to report back, as Lesley said, in the round. And we'll be coming back with a report to the June committee, and as part of that, we need to the assessment criteria that we've set out. So I'm just trying to find my notes. So impact on businesses will include not just whether there's additional space for people on the street to walk, but also the impact on what impacts there have been on loading and what impacts there are on parking. So we're going to come back in June with the criteria there on the council's website I don't know if it makes sense to me to go into a lot of detail right now, but we reported in January, on January 28th. They're sitting there on the website, and we're working up at the moment exactly how we will how we'll assess these impacts. You know, we're not going to have huge amounts of survey data available, so we're going to have to come up with some methodology to report back to the committee. And clearly, as Lesley said, it's very difficult to separate out impacts of all the different things all the different impacts of projects on a business. What's the impact of increased space versus what's the impact of reduced parking? What's the impact on loading, and what we might be able to do in a more in an experimental project or a more permanent project, as opposed to what we've done during the pandemic, which we've done under a very restrictive set of powers in terms of what we can actually do on the street.
And of course, we've seen some small businesses taking advantage of the cycle lane outside, haven't they, and to promote that and support it. And I think Severino's Slice has managed to win several awards for being a champion for cyclists because of the way it's sort of said it won't take deliveries from vans that park in the wrong place. Okay, just to follow up on that idea of impacts, we've had several questions which are about the impacts on people with disabilities. So a question about, you know, the issue about parking. So for blue badge holders, and the way in which Spaces for People has possibly led to changes for blue badge holders and about where they can park. We've also had sort of a similar question, which is about the impact then on people with disabilities crossing where there are Spaces for People measures. And so I think and there's a question from Derek Reed about that kind of, again, the sort of measurement of impacts on people with disabilities and what you're looking at there, so how that's being sort of gathered together. So I think maybe you can just sort of roll that into a general answer. Phil, I'm going to come to you again, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's
Lesley,
fine.
you can chip in afterwards.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think you know, again, this is something where there are different impacts depending on what you're doing. Thinking about somebody who's perhaps using a mobility scooter on the pavement. Now, the impact in somewhere like Morningside, for example, where there's significant areas of carriage road being given over to pedestrians, and it actually makes it easier for someone who's using, say, a mobility scooter to pass other people. That's one of the impacts that the projects will have had and would have going into the future on an experimental basis. Yes, in some places the amount of parking has been reduced, but however, someone with a blue badge can park on a single or a double yellow line only where there are loading restrictions, or they're not allowed to they're not allowed to park at the times of day that loading restrictions apply. So it isn't always the fact that there's a yellow line doesn't mean that you can't park if you're someone with a disability. How are we going to be assessing? Well, it's going to be about it's about space, it's about parking, and it's about crossing. And so some of the measures will have made it will have shortened crossing distances. There are some impacts on people parking. We can't hide from that. So, and what we'll be doing is reporting those impacts back to the committee as part of an assessment of the projects.
Lesley, did you want to add anything on folks with disabilities and how they've been handled or thought about in relation to Spaces for People?
I would consider them to have been a core part of the thinking that went into Spaces for People, despite the speed at which we had to operate in there. And I think, you know, that central part involves consultation with various different access groups representing people with different needs and requirements and so on. I met with a group of people not that long ago who were talking about this potential move to the permanent set of schemes to gauge what their specific requirements were. I think also too, if we want to pull it back from Spaces for People and look at some of the other projects that we've got, some of the big strategic stuff that we have got on the books at the moment, in terms of change to the city, the George Street plans that went out, disability access is absolutely key to that design. The only vehicles that will be allowed into George Street will be blue badge holders. And that takes people into the very heart of where they want to be. So, you know, that I hold that up as an example. There are lots of other examples in terms of our thinking and how we're developing pieces, which indicate quite clearly that we've got the needs of the disabled driver, the needs of the disabled community, in all sorts of ways at the heart of what we're trying to do. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people assume that we don't. And I think that's a real regret on my part, because I think we're trying very hard to pull together the needs, not only for the disabled community with all their, you know, the disabled community is not an homogenous group. There's a vast array of needs that sit in there that we need to provide as a council to the best of our ability. We also have to provide what other groups are looking for as well. So the balance across that, the council responsibility is to try and find a way to pull together all those different needs of all those different groups and somehow combine that into a single design. And it's immensely challenging to get it right all of the time. And there will be times when we get it more right than we do at other times. But the question of disabled access and the freedom to move around is absolutely central to the conversations, and has been from day one when we first started talking about this in terms of development of the Spaces for People piece.
Phil, you've got your hand waving.
Just to briefly come back on that. I mean, it has been at the core of the design process. It'll get all the way through the design process on this. We've been thinking about the impact on people with mobility impairments and people with visual impairments as well. So, for example, when you're talking about a traffic light pedestrian crossing, not having the cycle lane defenders too close to that, so that to reduce the potential hazard to somebody who's got a visual impairment who might cross slightly off the line of the crossing. So that kind of thing has been in our thought process all the way through the design process. And as Lesley says, you know, we've not always got it perfectly, but it's certainly been there in really at the heart of what we've been thinking about throughout the process.
Thank you both. Okay, let's move on. We haven't got very much longer, so we've got time for a few more questions. So I thought if we move things on again, and there's a question here which is about safety. Now, Lesley, you mentioned safety, and you also mentioned the sort of tragic fatalities we've had in Edinburgh. And Neil Anderson says, the current projects, SFP projects, don't tend to address junctions. We all know junction redesign is enormously expensive. £300 for a defender and a bollard is super cheap, but a junction, it's tens of thousands of pounds, or more, hundreds of thousands of pounds. So given that, the fatalities that we see and KSIs, so killed and seriously injured incidents, they all tend to be at junctions. So how are we going to get to this safety nirvana, the utopia of a safe place to cycle without those junction interventions? I think Phil and Lesley, I'm afraid it's your show this evening. Who wants to?
I'll apologise on both of us for sort of hogging the airwaves. The question of junctions is enormously important to the city. You know, our junctions have evolved, and unfortunately, a lot of them are not fit for purpose at the moment, particularly with the rise in interest in sustainable transport options, everything from walking to cycling and to peeling, as well as the impact on public transport. Junctions do not fall within the possibility of Spaces for People funding. We just can't do it. It's not part of the construct. It's not part of the expectation around the funding. We just can't do it. But we recognise the fact there's a clear need for it. And you know, I hesitate to mention this in any sort of glib way, but after that last dreadful fatality at King's Road, my immediate instinct that week was to ask senior officers to look at a number of dangerous junctions that we know of around the city and see what we can do to produce a more coherent approach and to specify some of those key junctions to try and improve things. Now, I think anybody who's ever been involved, whether it's somebody from outside or somebody internally to the council, recognises that whenever you get into junction redesign or you don't allow HGVs to go through a particular lane or you don't do this, there's a knock-on effect on the rest of the transport network. And that's often one of the big problems that we have, where we could end up directing, for example, heavy goods vehicles, which of course are the most dangerous from the point of view of cyclists and pedestrians, down residential roads in order to clear a junction. So how we balance those is intricate and it's complex, and we are trying to work our way through to finding some kind of protocol that will take us further forward in terms of those key dangerous junctions at the moment. Now, inevitably, it's going to take longer than everybody would want it to, because it is a complex process, but it's on its way, and we'll be seeing some stuff come forward to committee relatively soon across this year that will start us on that road more effectively. And there is also, in relation to the King's Road junction, there is some specific changes being made there. Not enough, but we're limited by the context that we're in at the moment. So there's some short-term action being taken to try to improve safety there.
Bill.
Okay. So I think one thing, just stepping back from junctions for a minute, I mean, junctions are hugely important, but I think it's worth that. It's worth noting that there are other things that the council's done, and not least the 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, that have an impact. And there was some very interesting research came out recently. I think it identified a 30% reduction in the number of casualties that have taken place in the, I think it was 2 years after the citywide 20-mile-an-hour speed limit was introduced. And some of those will have been serious, and I'm not sure about fatal collisions, but 20 miles an hour in my view, is a big contributor in that aspect, and it's also a big contributor in creating a more civilized street environment for walking and cycling. In terms of junctions, yes, I mean, I don't know if I've got that much to add to what Lesley said, although I think I don't want to sound like a kind of a negative bureaucrat, but I think it's worth mentioning that these things do tend to be really quite expensive to change a major junction, because if you're talking about moving lots of traffic lights around, for example, it costs a lot of money. The other thing I think that at a high level that I would point out is that this city has a very successful, very well used bus network, and buses, to keep that bus network operating reliably, the buses need to get through junctions, and doing that to not delaying buses at junctions whilst giving over space to cycling and walking is actually really challenging, because the space comes from motorized traffic, and obviously one can prioritize public transport to a certain extent, but you often create queues, and the buses get stuck in the queues. So that's the challenge that we face as a council and as officers in actually trying to do this. Is it's expensive, and it has impacts, on public transport as well as on walking and cycling. So we're trying to sort of improve a transport system that will get us towards a sustainable future, and we certainly need to take action on junctions, but unfortunately it's quite tricky.
Okay, we're running out of time, and I'm supposed to do a little roundup, but I want to have one last question. I mean, there's many strands here that we can could pull on. And thank you for the interesting questions that you've been posting this to the audience. There's some really good points in here, and I'm afraid we can't cover everything. But there's a point here which is about social media, and Lesley talked about sort of disinformation and erroneous information that floats about, and people jump up and down. And so there's a question here about anti-spaces for people, Facebook groups, and somebody, Tosh White, nobly trying to counter some of the messages with points about environment and climate and safety. And so Tosh asks, how do we build pro SFP social media? And I just want to let you all have one sentence. So sorry, everybody, time's limited. We're nearly out of time. So I'm going to come to everyone in turn. I'm going to start with Phil, and then I'll come to Jocelyn. So get your answers ready. So just one sentence. What can we do on social media?
I'll leave it to Lesley. I don't do social media.
Jocelyn, please.
On to me then. Well, I think I'm chiming with something that Claire mentioned earlier, where she said that the children are a kind of a litmus test for the safety of a road. So I believe in using them as the bargaining hoops, because it's very hard to tell anybody that you're quite happy to let a child be in danger on a road. So yeah, that's what I would do. Use the kids.
Lesley.
Did you say I was only going to get one sentence? I could speak for hours on this topic. I think there's two groups really who have an approach to SFP. There are those who are keen on protecting the status quo, and there are those who are desperate to see change, usually against that background of sustainability and climate change and a desire for better quality of life and sustainable transport options. I think there is an enormous gulf in understanding that sits in both groups to an extent, but much more so in the groups of those who have suddenly realised that their environment is intending to be changed. And I think there's a lack of understanding about processes, democratic accountability inside the council, and why we're doing this and what we're hoping to achieve with it. I don't think that can be achieved on social media at the moment as it stands, because the conversation's become too polarised. It's been deeply disappointing. It's been one of the most disappointing aspects of my time in politics, because I see people using this topic as a means to hit back. And I don't think it's very useful for the city as a whole. In general terms, though, I would like to see a greater understanding being built around this consultation and how we make the decision going forward in June about what we might do with this going forward for the city. Thank you.
Thanks, Lesley. Claire.
Yes, I could also talk at length about this, but to be short, I would say ignore the haters. You're not going to be able to change their mind on social media. Instead, focus on positive messages, show how things are making a positive difference, and work with the people that engage with you in a positive way, that want to see change, and just mute or block the haters, because your mental health is quite important and you don't need that, to be honest. I would rather just focus on trying to make a positive difference than instead of fighting with random strangers on the internet who want to park their car everywhere, like in car, So that's my take.
Thanks, Claire. Ewen, last but not least.
Well, I can't better what Lesley and Claire and Jocelyn have already said on this, but what I would say from my perspective is that I see a very fundamental imperative environmentally and in the health of the nation. There are problems that need to be solved in terms of inactivity, in terms of environment, in terms of how we move around, how we interact as communities. And what I find difficult from the social media perspective, I don't know exactly how you would solve this, is that if there's no alternative and people are saying you're just changing things and we don't like the fact we can't drive between A and B anymore in as a short amount of time than we did before, if no alternative is given, I find that quite difficult. So I would agree with Claire, and a lot of the times there's nothing I can say in response to that. But what I think in terms of social media we need to do is to present rational arguments so that people who are in the middle, who have not necessarily come up with an opinion, can see those rational arguments and do exactly what Claire says, is that when you get people who are just hating for no very good reason, then we're not going to convince them. But what I would like to just push forward is that there are very good fundamental reasons why we need to look to long-term solutions to solve the problems we have. And if nobody is offering anything to solve those problems, then I don't know if we can really engage that helpfully in that regard.
Super. Well, thank you all for those thoughts to take away. So it's my job now to round up before I hand back for the close. So to pull all this together, I think we've heard about the enormous amount of work that went on, the achievements, really impressive when you put it on, the 40 kilometres of segregated cycleways and the amount of the road closures and the schools that have been affected, the numbers of places and parts of the city. It's very broad, the reach and the variety of interventions as well. So we should take our hats off to you both, Phil, and particularly Councillor Macinnes, Transport Convener, for that work. And as you said, it was something you had. It wasn't something that you worked up overnight. It was built on work that you'd already been doing. So lots of interventions, lots of implementation over a short period of time, a lot of learning, and now periods of reflection, deciding about the future and where to go next. There are lots of questions to be answered about the funding and maintenance and things in the future, but I think this point is one for us all to leave on, which is that this week the Scottish Government has enacted the UN Charter on the Rights of the Child. I'm getting tearful now because this is very close to my heart. Children's rights are now protected in Scottish law. Their rights to be safe, their rights to participate in their city, to be heard and to be taken seriously by adults, to have influence on decisions that affect their lives. And I think Claire began by reminding us about the children as a kind of an indicator species within the city. And I would like to just close with the words of Enrique Peñalosa from Bogota, the very famous city mayor who did some very inspirational work. And he talks about that. If we're going to talk about transport, a great city is not one that has highways, but is one where a child on a bike can go safely everywhere. And I think in that spirit and in the spirit of the UNCRC, that is what I hope Edinburgh will become. Thank you. Back to you, spokes.
Hi, it's Martin here. So yeah, you didn't get to see me during the whole meeting. That meant everything went well. And I'm really grateful to all of our speakers for the talks and presentations that they gave, to all of you who submitted questions, and for Caroline for organising an, as usual, very entertaining question and answer session. We did get about 60 questions coming in during the meeting. We weren't able to answer them all, but quite a few of those were on similar topics, and Caroline did well at putting them together. We think there's a way that we can save the questions, and we might be able to put some up on our website and possibly give some answers to some, or pass them on to the council for them perhaps to answer on social media. Before we go as well, I would like to tell you that on the Scottish national scale, Cycling UK have a manifesto and a petition that they would like people to sign to make improvements for cycling. They also are going to be organising a hustings, which I think I have a link to here that I can put in the group chat. There it goes. So it's a save the date for the 20th of April. So that'll be hustings on a national level along with Living Streets. Next steps for all of you now is, if you haven't already done so, to respond to the council consultation. There's an article all about it on the Spokes website. I'm very happy to say that Spokes has a good working relationship with the council, and they have included us as stakeholders in these Spaces for People schemes. which has involved us in a huge amount of work. We have some very dedicated people from spokes are all volunteers, but very few in number. So if you'd like to know more about what's happening or to help in any way, then please join up with spokes. We're also involved in the major junctions review that is about to be taking place, and we've given a lot of input into that on what we think are the junctions that most require attention. And what else? Yeah, and then we're going to have our hustings in April, as Dave said, and further web events throughout the year. So big thanks to Cycling UK for giving us the technology and the support during the meeting for this meeting to go ahead. It's been a great success. It's been really easy to organise, much easier than the public meetings, and cheaper too. And it's good that we can get so many people here. We've still got 112 people in attendance at the moment, so that's really good. So without further ado, I think I shall say thank you and good night to you all, and give yourselves all a pat on the back or a clap or whatever for your participation. And see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
End webinar for all, it says. So that, I think that's what I do. I just click on that.